think that you're going to be so good. I think that you're going to do such a good job. Whoa.
Who's your good boy?
Whoa.
Who's your good boy?
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome
Hello.
to episode 1 of Beep. I am your host. I am one host, Andrew, and I'm joined with my other host.
I'm Yusei.
Yusei.
Yes.
And today we're going to be talking about the Mothman.
Yes, we are.
And now, just full disclosure, this is the second time that we've tried to record this because the first time we were using one microphone and it sounded awful. So we're going to re-record it now. So Yusei is filled in a little bit.
A little bit,
But there's a lot of information, and I don't think that he's going to necessarily remember everything. So there should be some shocks. Plus, I've added some information since then, so we should be okay.
Right. He's going to mix me up.
So today we're going to be talking about the Mothman. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Mothman, it's been described as a giant humanoid bird with a huge wingspan and glowing red eyes. The creature was said to have stalked Point Pleasant, West Virginia between 1966 and 1967. Though Kenneth Duncan was technically the first to see it, most would consider the encounter by a young group of friends to be the start of the Mothman story. But we're actually going to start with the Kenneth Duncan sighting, just because it is somewhat... It's not the exciting one. So we're going to get it done. We're going to get it out of the way now.
Right.
Okay? So Kenneth Duncan is a West Virginia man. And on a cold night in 1966, him and 4 other men were out digging a grave. Okay. I believe it was for Kenneth Duncan's father. I don't know if he had died or if he was on his deathbed or something, but they were digging his grave because I guess at the time, grave diggers weren't a profession. I don't know.
Right. They just did it.
They just did it. So, Kenneth Duncan and 4 others were digging a grave for his recently deceased father-in-law, Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson.
Honestly,
Homer Smith. No.
Honestly, at this point in the story, he just is Homer Simpson. Yeah. Okay.
So they were digging Homer Simpson's grave.
Homer Simpson's grave. Gotcha.
And he claims that he and he alone saw a man-like flying figure above the trees over their heads and claims to have watched it for almost about a minute. Now,
60 seconds.
60 full seconds.
Yeah.
And didn't say anything to his friends or anything like that. I personally don't really... I'm going to get this out of the way now. Yeah. This is not the interesting one. So we're going to just gloss over this. And we're going to go to the real sighting. Now, this is the sighting that started everything.
Right.
Okay? The day is November 15th, 1966. Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette were out driving through the roads of Point Pleasant. They decided to go over to the TNT area, an old munitions plant turned hangout spot for teens at the time. While driving through the area, they noticed a large flying man with a 10-foot wingspan glowing in their headlights. Understandably terrified, the couple sped out of there, trying to understand what just happened. They decided not to go to authorities. They thought they were going to be humiliated. So instead, they just decided to go back to the TNT area to figure out what it was. So they didn't really get like a really good look at it the first time. It was just a glimpse.
Right.
But it was just this glowing-eyed birdman, more or less. So for the second time that night, they head back to the TNT area. So at this point, they're driving out and they see a dead dog on the side of the road.
Right.
And now that'll come into play somewhat later. It's a detail that I feel like I had to put in because John Keel talks about it a lot.
Got you.
But there was a dead dog on the side of the road on the way in. And then they claim that the Mothman then encountered them again, chased their car, started banging on the hood of the car. And on the way out, one of them claims that they did not see the dead dog. But they just maybe said they didn't notice it or whatever. There was a lot going on. There was a giant flying monster chasing their car. So they weren't like, oh, where's that dog? You know?
Right. It could have just been confirmation bias.
It could have just been confirmation bias. Exactly.
Yeah.
So they turned away and they turned around and they sped away. The creature was easily keeping up. This time it started to slam on the roof of the car, but they managed to get away. Once they were in town, they decide, you know what? We should go to the cops. They go to the station. They write a report. And the cops actually spread the word and tell the town that they think there's a monster in the town. Right. So now, if this sounds like a 1950s monster movie, it's really similar to a lot of 1950s monster movies, like beat for beat. It's crazy. And this was all written, mind you. The first account of this was put out in, I believe, 1977. So it was almost 10 years to the time of the original events. Right. That being said, there could have been a lot of influence from those times that kind of shaped it, because no matter what, it was a book and all that stuff. Right. So this was the sighting that started the Mothman. It kind of made this town go nuts. Point Pleasant was going crazy. They were like on fire with this whole thing of the Mothman. And daily after that point, people started seeing the Mothman.
Right. Point Pleasant's in
West Virginia.
West Virginia, my bad.
West Virginia. It's right on the border of West Virginia to Ohio.
Got you.
So the Ohio, the bridge that actually connects the two is very important to the story. Yes. And that bridge connects them to Ohio. And the reason that bridge is so important is because it was the only bridge for 30 miles in either direction that would bring them to Ohio. So if you had family that lived there, that bridge was the only way you could get to them without driving like an hour and a half out of the way.
Right.
So all of this is happening in the town. They start to see the Mothman. Everybody's going crazy. They're all reporting it. And we get our first hero of the story. Well, I've mentioned him already. He's the king of Mothman, I guess, and books that are okay.
Right.
John Keel.
John Keel.
That's me clapping. Why aren't you clapping?
This is
John Keel.
This is the hunter.
This is the man.
The man.
This is the Jesus of the story.
The man who pieced everything together.
Yeah, sort of. So he is the one that wrote the Mothman Prophecies, which is what this entire episode is based off of for the most part.
Right.
So John Keel is a very important figure of this story. He is basically more or less the reason that we have a lot of documentation of the story.
Right.
It was pretty well documented. There were newspaper articles about it at the time. It did become somewhat national news, so people did understand what was happening across the country. And it became like a quirky news story, almost like if someone across in Jersey saw the Jersey Devil or something like that. It would just be like a fun little news story.
Right.
But people didn't realize the significance of the events in town until he put this book out. So John Keel, he grew up in Hormel, New York. He was born on March 25th, 1930. So he was in his 30s when this happened. He was 36, I believe.
Okay.
When he was a kid, he was interested in magic, and he actually had his first article published. So he always was a writer. He loved to write. And he even claims that later on in life, he joined the U.S. Army. It was during the Korean War, and he had joined up with the staff of the American Forces Network in Germany, where he claims that he was trained in psychological warfare as a propaganda writer. So that is important to his story for two reasons.
Yes.
The first reason to me is that if this is true, this means that this gives him the ammunition to be able to write something as crazy as Mothman Prophecies and kind of get you to understand it and believe it.
Right.
And if he's lying about this, it then also makes him...
proves.
It more or less confirms that everything that happened was bullshit. So you just kind of have to take him for everything. Or if you feel like any of his story is false, then nothing is true. Because everything leans on the fact that he claims he was a propaganda writer.
He's right. He's the catalyst.
This is how he supposedly was led to the Mothman and all these crazy things. Because when he was there, he saw the practices of the U.S. government and was kind of weirded out by what they were doing. And he just didn't understand it.
Gotcha.
So he was trying to more or less, his life work after this was to figure out what these things were and get that out to the public with UFOs and cryptids and all these things. And he is realistically an instrumental part in that happening in that time.
Right.
He is like one of the big pillars of, I've been using the word pillars a lot today. He's one of the big pillars of UFO writing and UFO thought, especially in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
He also did write some other fun books. He wrote Disneyland of the Gods, which is about UFO and all that. Disneyland of the Gods. He wrote a book called Why UFOs? The Operation Trojan, which is also about UFOs. But he also wrote a book called The Fickle Finger of Fate. And this book was adult erotica book.
Oh.
And it was cartoons.
Okay.
I believe it was Batman themed. It was like a fake Batman. And he would go and touch titties and shit.
A little weird.
Yeah, a little weird.
A little weird.
A little strange. But listen, he was a U.S. propaganda writer, so maybe it was propaganda. We never know.
Yeah. Who are we to judge?
Who are we to judge?
Well, who knows? Who knows?
So John Keel would go to Point Pleasant for the first time, not too long after the first sighting. It was maybe a month or two after the first sighting.
Right.
And then the second sighting also. So the first sighting was on the 12th of November. The second sighting was on the 15th of November. I would say confidently that 3-day break from this point on until the end of the story is probably the longest someone went without seeing Mothman at that time. That's how prevalent this was in town. Everyone was seeing it.
Right.
Everyone in that area of town, I should say.
Right.
The TNT area. Everyone was seeing it on their lawns. They were seeing it through their windows, in their backyards at night. It was just wild. Everybody was going crazy. So there were a lot of significant other sightings, and I'm just going to kind of give you a little list of the ones I thought were interesting. This is just a handful that I picked out of things that happened directly after, because they tend to be the most interesting. Because realistically, after a while, it just becomes, we saw a monster with glowing red eyes in the trees, and everyone's is kind of the same after a while. So these were the interesting ones. So, would you like to read one?
Yes, I would.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm so funny.
No, you're good.
All right. November 16th, 1966. Mr. and Mrs. Wamsleys?
Wamsleys.
Wamsleys?
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 Wamsleys.
Did I say that right?
I have no idea.
All right, Mr.
Wamsleys.
I like Wamsleys.
Wamsleys is really fun.
I like Wamsleys.
It sounds like the family that kept Harry Potter under the stairs. The Wamsleys. What were they called?
No, you're thinking of Weasley.
No.
Are you sure?
What was his aunt and uncle's name?
I don't remember. I hated them.
It's like Charles Wamsley. Wamsley.
Watch that be it. All right. I'm never gonna get through this.
Just speed through it.
Speed through it. November 16th, 1966. Mr. and Mrs. Wamsleys, along with friend Marcella Bennett.
Nailed it.
And her infant daughter.
Hell yeah, I don't know her name. So
spotted the Mothman behind their parked car.
Yeah.
Marcella dropped her baby out of fear. They ran inside. What?
You're reading it so slow.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to comprehend.
Don't comprehend. I'll explain it after.
All right, I'm sorry. I'm telling you like a story. I'm sorry.
This supposedly all happened while hundreds of people.
Yeah.
According to Keel.
Hold on, wait. Let me continue. You want me to do it again?
No.
All right. They ran inside and Mothman disappeared. This supposedly all happened while hundreds of people, according to Keel, were out scouring the area, ready to kill it.
Yeah, so this is the first sighting that... this is the first sighting after the big sighting. But this is also significant for a couple reasons, and John Keel kind of alludes to this reason in the book, right? At the time, even in the book, he refers to women and people that aren't white men. He has some weird ways of referring to people. I would say that.
Okay.
The book was written in the 70s. This took place in the 60s. It's not exactly like the most tolerant time for American culture. Time. So he talks about this event as like Marcella Bennett he thinks she's telling the truth because it would be massively embarrassing for a woman at the time to admit she dropped her child because she thought she saw a monster in the air.
Right.
So that, to him, legitimizes her story a little bit. Because it's like, why would you even say... It's just going to bring negative attention to you. There's no real reason for you to even say that unless you were really, actually, genuinely terrified or you saw something. So he saw that as almost like a confirmation that it happened in a way that,
right.
The only other way he would have thought it happened was if he was standing there. That's more or less how he presented it in the book.
Couldn't it be the opposite way? Like she was embarrassed that she dropped the baby, so then she was like, let me just point to it.
Nailed it. Literally, that was going to be my point. Nailed it.
Yeah,
no,
she
100%.
could just be like, oh, well, this thing's going around, and let me just blame it.
So it's hard because it's like all three of them say that they saw the same thing, right. And they say it dove beneath the car. But this is where the moth part kind of carries into it now. So now we haven't really spoken about it, right?
Right.
But the Mothman wasn't described as a moth at first.
Right.
The Mothman was described as a human that had a wingspan and had bird-like features, or it had red eyes or something like that, but it looked like a person.
Right.
After the media in town had dubbed it Mothman, or I don't know if it was the media in town or the national media, whatever, they had dubbed it Mothman because there had just been a Mothman character coming out of the Batman universe. So they just named it Mothman because it was the hot thing at the time.
That's
exactly.
Right, I remember.
So this is the first instance where it was described as a giant moth and not as a giant man, which is a very important thing because it'll flip-flop back and forth as time goes on. So there's like almost like two camps. There's like the camp of people that heard about it after the fact, and then there's the camp of people that were involved directly.
Right.
The camp of people involved directly insist it was a giant bird. The rest of the people insist it's a giant moth.
Oh, interesting.
So this kind of is a weird... It's a very common thing with cryptids or
right.
Even just like undiscovered animals and stuff like that. This isn't really anything new necessarily.
Right.
But it is important to point out that they did have differing opinions on what it looked like and what it was necessarily. And just the fact that it would change so often was a little suspect to John Keel. So his solution to that was go and get everyone's testimony, and just kind of just piece it together and see what was true, what was similar and what wasn't, and then kind of drop the information that wasn't. He took a very scientific method to the idea of the Mothman.
Right.
He didn't want to influence people. He would go and ask people questions and not directly ask them about the Mothman so that they wouldn't be tainted or talking about. He would just kind of have them bring it up in their own volition. He would say like, "Oh, is there anything weird that you saw, or did you hear about this thing that happened with Marcella Bennett or the Scarberry couple? Do you have any similar stories?" And then kind of get it out of them that way.
Right.
And by doing this, he was able to get all of these encounters. So that was the 16th. On the 17th, a Roy Gross claimed that he woke up to his dog barking, and his little boy said that there was a giant bird that hovered over a car on the street, and that he saw a UFO earlier that day. On the 18th, 2 firemen claimed to see a giant bird. On the 20th, 5 people claimed to see a giant bird. On the 24th, 4 people claimed to see a moth. On the 25th and the 26th, 2 people claimed to see a moth. So you could see it's going back and forth.
Right.
And these are just a handful of these encounters. It's easy to dismiss the giant bird sightings due to the idea that the Mothman looked like a humanoid moth with glowing red eyes, but in reality, it was much more akin to a bird, and it's not given an actual reliable appearance for basically the entire time that this is happening.
Right.
Most of the sightings happened in Point Pleasant and in the surrounding areas, and they were all seen as giant, somewhat man-like bird with glowing red eyes. But there were also giant bird sightings happening across the country at the time. And this is something that John Keel makes a point of, because almost like in the UFO world, here we're going to learn some terminology here, right?
Let's go.
In the UFO world, when there is an event and there is a time, right? Why are you laughing at me? Why are you laughing at me?
The event, the way you said event.
Event?
Yeah. It was just funny the way you said
An event? Okay. This is very serious work. Okay? We're talking about extraterrestrials. This is very serious. Okay?
When there's an event.
When there is an event,
yeah.
And there is a period of time where things are happening in multiple places at once, they call that a flap. So that is a UFO flap.
Right.
A cryptid flap.
Got you.
Okay?
So when there's like multiple
And I'm going to say
circles,
a couple of these people had a couple extra flaps, if you know what I'm saying.
So like a bunch of crop circles happening at one night.
Exactly.
Got you.
So
flap.
crop circles, if a bunch of people see Bigfoot all at once, and or if there's a UFO sighting and multiple different towns see it, that's considered a flap. And a flap is more significant than a single sighting. Right. So like the Kenneth Duncan sighting wouldn't be a flap necessarily. But the month of November in this town would be considered a flap because there was multiple things happening to multiple people over a span of time.
Right.
So there was, according to John Keel, a huge flap going on for giant birds, UFOs, and dinosaurs, which I think is really cute. There were some dinosaur sightings, pterodactyls. I think some guy saw a triceratops. I would fucking love to see a triceratops.
I mean, maybe Mothman could
transform.
Mutate, like his skin.
And he was just everywhere at once.
No, he could change into the shape of a triceratops. That'd be sick.
So, if you were to take what John Keel says as fact when it comes to these flap events,
which I do
also,
right?
We're going to go ahead and say that the collective conscious of the time was very heavy into monsters, UFOs, and just general otherworldly things.
Yes.
There were a ton of sci-fi things happening at that time. I would say even maybe a sci-fi revolution in terms of entertainment and TV and more film. Obviously, TV shows weren't really like a fucking, big thing yet. You good? You good? Oh, You're burping?
Mm-hmm. Don't say anything.
Stop burping.
Stop it.
So the general public at the time was very concerned with those types of things.
Yeah.
So those were the things that they were expecting to see. And that kind of leads to a point that John Keel will make later in his career, in his books that go into like the late 70s and the 80s, where John Keel puts forward a point that a couple other UFO researchers had put forward, that when you see a cryptid, or you see a UFO, or you see a ghost, or you just see something that you shouldn't be seeing, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're seeing. It could just be that's how your brain is interpreting it.
Right.
So the way that I had it explained to me by the wonderful people at Last Podcast, basically the point of it is, if you're religious and you're hyper-religious and you see an otherworldly thing that shouldn't be in this dimension, you might see an angel or a demon. Right. If you love Bigfoot, you might see Bigfoot. If you love UFOs, you're going to see an alien. And it all just kind of depends on what your brain is able to put towards that thing. Right. And if you've ever seen Color Out of Space by... it was originally an H.P. Lovecraft story, and then it was made into a movie with Nicolas Cage. It's actually great. No. That kind of represents the idea of, if we were able to interpret the uninterpretable, that's the idea of what it would be. But for this case, we're going to assume that that isn't possible. And the Mothman or Bigfoot or UFOs are just kind of what the original person said, kind of created it and made it into, it's called a tulpa. So it's like a thought being brought into existence by just thinking about it. So like Freddy Krueger would be a tulpa. Slenderman is an example of a modern tulpa.
Gotcha.
And that figure is kind of what John Keel went after, just kind of after this story. It led him down that path. But the Mothman itself, it shifted. It changed to whatever the person thought they were going to see. So more or less, if I thought that the Mothman was a giant moth with red eyes, I would see a giant moth with red eyes instead of a giant bird. Right. More or less.
And especially if the character resembled someone in Batman that week.
Exactly. Then, yeah. Exactly. So now, once again, the Mothman wasn't the only thing being reported in West Virginia. Not only the rest of the country, but just in West Virginia. There were so many other things being reported. Right. According to Keel, weeks before the Mothman, people all over the state were reporting UFOs, cryptids, and like I said, in some cases, dinosaurs. After the word spread around about the Mothman, the town was apparently littered with men in black. They're often cited with having pale skin. Sometimes they have dark tan skin. Men in black. Where am I?
You said men in black?
Keep my wife's name. So they're often cited to having pale skin.
Yeah.
Or dark tan skin. And by tan, I don't mean like dark, like melanin dark. I mean like tan, like spray tan, like orange. That's how they were apparently looked. Like they were, like they were all made to look human.
Right.
So the Men in Black are fucking hilarious, honestly, because they're just these giant morons that just are made to look human, and they're all just like, can I have a drink? And then they just start drinking bleach and shit. Like, this is delicious.
Right. It's kind of like the Men in Black.
It's kind of like the Roach guy in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's exactly what this is like. It's kind of like that guy where he's like, I'm a human, or whatever the fuck he says. So, so after the word about the Mothman spread around, the town was littered with the Men in Black. They would also be told to speak in a like a monotone, emotionless voice, almost like they had like a speech box, some of them, and then other ones would speak normally in terms of like inflection and stuff like that, but they would have a stutter. So it was either they were like, did you see the Mothman? Or they were like, did you see the Mothman? There was like no in between. Right? What started happening in town is that the encounters shifted. And Mothman was still being seen, but then the Men in Black encounters kind of became the focal point. And this is a weird part about this story, is that the Mothman story is really hardly about Mothman itself, and it's more about John Keel just kind of being like a nuisance to this otherworldly team of like just weird alien hunters that are just trying to figure out what the Mothman is and just trying to get John Keel to stop talking about it. If you've never read the book, it's fantastic. You should go read it.
Right.
It's really dumb. There are parts that you're just going to be like, what am I reading? There's a lot of stories that he tells that have fucking nothing to do with what he's talking about. It's just filler. But it's so interesting and it's so stupid that you just read it and you just can't help but fall in love with John Keel. He's a very lovable figure.
Right.
And now, while all of this was happening in town, like I said, the Men in Black encounters started to ramp up. And one of the more chilling Men in Black encounters came as a failed abduction in 1967. So this is a little bit after the actual sightings. The woman was named Connie Carpenter. She was actually one of the first people to see Mothman back in the day. And she claimed that she was called over to a brand new all-black 1949 Buick Cadillac. What?
All black.
Did I just say Buick Cadillac? Is that right?
No. Those
What am I saying?
different.
Oh, I was Buick Skylark from fucking My Cousin Vinny. That's what I'm thinking of. And the thing that she said was when she was brought over to the car, she was enamored by how new it was. She said it looked like it had just rolled out of a factory. She said every part of it, the tires, the paint job, it looked like it was like that day brought out of a factory.
Right.
She said the man called over to her, told her to come to the car. When she approached, the man had attempted to abduct her, pulling her into the car. She managed to break free. She ran home and she called for help. The next day, it was in the middle of the afternoon. She didn't go to school. She stayed home. She was younger. She was in high school, I believe.
Hell yeah.
She stayed home because she was terrified to go outside. She thought she was going to encounter him again, and she just didn't want to run into him. And apparently, a note was slipped under her door, and it said, "Be careful, girl. I could get you yet." So now, that story, to me,
like that story.
doesn't necessarily scream Men in Black. And we talked about this last. I know I told you not to reference it, but this is just it just naturally is where the conversation goes.
Yeah.
Does this necessarily sound like the Mothman or Men in Black, or does it sound like just some guy was trying to abduct a woman?
Could have been.
And this is the problem with this type of thing.
Right.
Is that now everything is being blamed on the Mothman. Who knows what the fuck happened in this town? And they were like, oh, it was the gosh dang Mothman. And it's like just some guy named Jim killing people.
The confirmation bias exponentially grows in every other weird, unique story.
Exactly.
Right. Someone like turns up dead. It could have been...
It's the Mothman.
Yeah, it could have just been domestic vience. And they're like, nah, it's the Mothman. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very dangerous. Saying. That's not good. Right. Because something like this...
Right, but I still believe it, though.
I still do, too. And that's the weird, fucked up part, is that I'm still like, yeah, but it was probably the Men in Black,
Probably the Men in Black.
It couldn't just be a person. It had to be an alien, right?
Yeah, and then the Men in Black eventually produced that movie. There was like a documentary.
Well, there is
an
idea that the CIA made Men in Black movie to, like, change the perception of Men in Black in public. In like the public sphere.
To brainwash us to think, haha, that's
more or less,
fiction.
Yeah. To be like, oh, that's really so funny. They're so goofy. They're Will Smith.
Right.
You know?
But really, it's like...
lovable,
it's like, no, this happened. And then it's like, you have to forget that it's real.
Yeah.
By making it fiction. Yeah. That's actually like reverse engineering.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that.
That's super,
like a lot of UFO movies that are apparently just,
they just made the movie.
Yeah, it's like propaganda and shit.
That's brilliant.
The problem is anytime UFOs or aliens are involved with anything, someone thinks that it's real and they're covering it up. That's the problem with UFO stuff. It's like if I went out right now and I went and with my iPhone, me and you made a fucking movie in my backyard and I made it look like I saw an alien and we presented it as real in any way,
right?
Someone would assume it's real and they would write a whole thing about how we're tied to like George Bush and how the Bush family fucking funded 9/11.
Right,
and then that's the reason they funded 9/11 is because we made a deal with the aliens in the 50s to get Wi-Fi, and that was our payback because they needed souls. And it's just like, how did I get here? It's all the Jews' fault. That's how it always ends. It's all the Jews' fault.
Right.
It's the problem with UFO research is that it always ends up being anti-Semitic every single time. So when Keel went to the police station to investigate the note because she had let him know that she brought the note to the police accused him of being an undercover federal agent. And they said that they wouldn't support federal agents because they thought that they were trying to impede on their research. Their investigation, I mean.
Right.
Now, that is interesting because to me, that sounds like maybe the Men in Black had already gone there and claimed they were federal agents and had been causing issues at the police station, and even the cops were fucking done with it. So now John Keel went in there and they were just like, oh, it's another one of these fucking weirdos. Like, no, just get out. And they were just like, yeah, we lost it. And they claimed they lost the note and no one ever saw the note again. I don't necessarily think that's like the Men in Black were running the police station. I think that was just, they were just fucking done. And they were just like, I don't care.
Right.
Where every day I join this to stop crime, and now I'm looking for a giant moth for a year and a month.
Right.
You know? So God
Also,
knows how many
like,
times the police were called out for like the dumbest shit.
That's what I'm saying. Also,
You know?
like, imagine like if the Men in Black did show up, right? And they have these like federal badges that they just like made out of their
And it's just, it's
back.
just like,
They had that car.
it's just,
and then
it's just crayon.
Right, but like at that time though, like we're talking 66. Like I could see like someone at the police farm being like, "All right, cool, yeah, you're the feds," and then just letting them run rampant, and then they're probably just annoyed with the fact that they were running rampant.
I could probably order something online and go and trick somebody,
and go and find some, and go inside 100%. Somewhere, yeah.
So it's not totally out of the question, but just the fact that they were like so annoyed with him thinking he was a federal agent, they had to have been dealing with that somewhat,
right? And
I just assume it has to do with Mothman and all that stuff, but a lot of people attribute that to the Men in Black, or the people in town attribute that to the Men in Black.
They were real.
Yeah, of course.
They were real aliens.
They were really. Yeah, I don't think that the Men in Black are things. I think that they are an interdimensional police force.
Mm.
That's how I look at them.
Do you think they just like download English real quick?
Yeah, sort of.
Is that why it's like stuttery?
It's almost like if we took Google Translate and used that to translate a language, like an unknown language, into English. It's like close, but it's just not. Right. An English speaker will understand the difference. That's kind of what it feels like when they talk about it.
Yeah, that's how I was thinking.
Yeah, so it's just like, instead of saying like I don't know, I dropped the sponge, you know? Right. Doing my dishes. They'd be like, I dropped a sponge. And it's just like, what do you mean a sponge? It's the sponge. What are you talking about, you know? So, according to Keel, unsuspecting UFO witnesses all over Point Pleasant, and the UFO with, I'm saying just random acronyms.
Go.
Unsuspecting UFO witnesses all over Point Pleasant and all over the U.S. at that point, according to John Keel, were also receiving strange phone calls. Now, what you're going to see in this story is that the Men in Black, the things that they would apparently do in their tactics are all the things that we know the Men in Black for. So this story and another story, which I will touch on in a minute, are kind of what made the Men in Black what they are and how we know them today. So this story is very important to the Men in Black mythos. It's kind of where it started.
Okay.
I don't know if that's significant to you, but when I was reading it, I didn't know this is where it started, and I've loved this stuff since I was a kid.
Right.
And that was just kind of mind-blowing to know that this is the origin of it for the most part. The strange calls, they would include humming, beeping, buzzing, and sometimes full speech. There was one occasion that John Keel talks about in Oregon in 1961, where two women were on the phone, and apparently their line cut off, and it was replaced with a man shouting, "Wake up down there!"
That's great.
What do you think?
That's great. That's either God or aliens, right?
It has to be. It can't just be a random fucking person that accidentally went onto their line because it's 1966 and they're manually plugging things into a wall.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing else about that. That's where he ends it in the book. He just says, "Wake up down there," and then it just goes on to another story. It's really stupid.
Or maybe like the guy upstairs picked up the line.
Yeah, he's just hitting the broom on the floor going, "Wake up down there."
There's a fire.
And she's just on the phone with her friend, the flames all over, just the smoke everywhere. She's like, "I don't know what's going on."
She's like the dog in the fire.
Yeah, everything's okay.
Everything's fine. That's so funny.
So two women were on the...
God.
I already read that.
That's God, obviously.
So now, the next... I want to read this quote.
Yeah.
Right? But this quote is from the legendary Woody Derenberger.
Oh, legendary.
Legendary. Now, this man... We will cover him. There is so much to his story.
Yeah.
And he is led to someone named Indrid Cold, who may or may not have some type of bearing on this story, but I'm going to be honest with you. While writing this script, I could not figure out a way to reliably get Indrid Cold in this story.
Right. Without
telling two totally different stories just happening parallel to each other.
Too much.
It is. They don't really intersect as much as people would like to believe they did.
Yeah.
More or less, Woody Derenberger was on a highway in 1966. I believe it was early November before the Mothman sightings. I want to say it was a week before. And a giant cigar-shaped craft landed in front of him. A man named Injured Cold came over and telepathically spoke to him and basically told him, I'm from planet
Zordon.
And I'm here to suck your dick. And then they just smiled at each other, and then he did an interview on TV, and John Keel interviewed him because, again, there were so many things happening in the area. According to him, this was just another thing. It was just probably the weirdest out of most of them, right? But one day we have to cover. One day we have to cover John Keel.
Yes.
I'm sorry. We have to cover Woody and we have to cover Injured Cold because it's fascinating. But it's just way too much to get into here. But that being said,
tune in next time.
100%. Give us a couple months and we'll get that one out.
Yeah.
So according to Woody, who did have a lot of experiences with the Men in Black, and he is also an instrumental part on how we understand the Men in Black today and how we perceive them. This is a quote that he read. This is a quote that he wrote in his book. And this is about the phone calls. Okay? As I write this book, I keep getting these phone calls warning me to stop. They have even called my wife at her place of employment, telling her to stop me or they will. These people also call my friends, making the same threats. I have no way of knowing who these people are, and yet they call me too often to be crank calls. He says crank instead of prank.
Maybe it was crank back then?
I don't know.
Like crank yankers. On
crank yankers.
Like Comedy Central.
Yeah.
They were prank calls, but they were called crank yankers.
Oh.
Maybe that's it.
Like the jerky boy. Crank and Jerk is very similar.
Wasn't that Jimmy Kimmel?
The Jerky Boys?
No, the Crank Yankers.
I have no idea.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but that shit was funny.
So he claims that they call too often to be crank calls.
Crank calls.
Several times I've written material that has disappeared from my home. When I leave my home for any reason, I always locked all the doors, all the windows, yet several times when I return home, we found our home had been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers all over the floor, valuable tapes missing, and my tape recorder's broken. I have mailed letters, dropped them personally to the post office letterbox, but they failed to reach their destination. That's how I imagine he would read it, just slowly getting more upset as it goes. Because he sounds like a fucking maniac, this guy. Yeah. So he claims that they would go into his office and they would constantly take stuff out that was important to his research or whatever. And again, this became a very stereotypical thing of the Men in Black. And this is something that they were doing to people in town that had seen the Mothman. Anytime anybody had seen something, they would go visit them and they would say one of two things. They would either talk about the Mothman and tell them that what they saw wasn't real and they need to forget about it, or they would try to discredit John Keel and say that he was a liar, he couldn't be trusted, and you shouldn't give him information because of A, B, and C. So they were kind of trying to figure things out while also not allowing John Keel to figure things out at the same time. But Keel fully believes Derenberger, stating that he would be a convincing liar because he at one point had his wife and kids on board. Not forever. They did leave eventually.
Right.
But at one point his wife and kids were on board and they supported what he was saying and they believed him. The Men in Black are probably more important to the story than Mothman. The phantom calls, weird speech, and threatening encounters stem largely from this story, as well as the Derenberger and Injured Cold story, which happened at the same time. And like we said, we will eventually cover that.
So are we still in the Men in Black?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the Men in Black?
Sure, of course. That's why you're here.
Why were they orange?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, tan, like spray tan orange, and nobody said anything because that was not a color back then.
Not really. So
people weren't freaked out about the color.
Yeah, no, they were. Like,
okay.
So like people in town.
Spray tan wasn't a thing back then.
No, it
didn't exist yet.
Yeah. No,
so how are they not freaking out?
Well, okay. So this actually leads beautifully into the next point.
Okay, perfect.
So the next person we're going to introduce into the story is a woman named Mary Hire, right? Yeah. No, beautiful. Honestly, he's just pumping his fist in the air, going, "Yeah, fuck yeah."
Fuck yeah.
But yeah, so Mary Hire is the next person in the story, and she actually is very important to the story, but a little bit later on. She's more or less John Keel's connection to Point Pleasant. She's the relay of information because John Keel was only in Point Pleasant for the year and a month that this was going on, was maybe there for 3 months at most. He was not there the entire time. He did not live there.
Right.
He lived in New York still. So he would go travel there, but anytime he wasn't there and something would happen or there would be an interesting report, she would send it over for his research, and they became very, very good friends.
Right.
Mary Hire is one of the people that was very skeptical of the Men in Black and brought their attention to John Keel. because they were weird looking. She claims that they were either, like you said, like spray tanned, which wasn't really a thing then,
Right.
or they were like almost transparent white. And I think that if you go with the logic, sorry, I'm just burping up falafel. If you go with the logic of the Men in Black and the paranormal aspect of it and all that stuff, the idea that they would be trying to make themselves look more human along with their speech and everything makes sense, that they would try to make themselves darker artificially because they were so light to our perception.
Right. So, like, did some of them, like, forget? They were like, oh, shit, we forgot to put our collar on.
I wonder if they were just like, we need variety.
Yeah.
You know, if they were just like, hey, Glassgar, can you just spray tan yourself, like, halfway? And then you, fourth, just make sure you get a real dark coat. That way the two of you look different enough, but kind of the same. Also, another weird feature is that they had really thin lips, and it looked like they would put lipstick on to make themselves look like they had lips, but it was almost like they just had like a slit in their skin. Does that make sense?
Very alien.
Like there was no like actual lip, like bulbous lip part.
Yeah,
it was just fucking slit.
Like Squidward.
Like Squidward
from Endgame.
What?
Oh, you didn't see Marvel.
Did you just say Squidward from? I must have missed. I don't watch.
He calls him Squidward. He's like, movie? Not today, Squidward. Yeah. Tony Stark calls the bad guy Squidward. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a SpongeBob reference in Marvel. It's sick. It's dope. But the guy has no lips. And that's what I'm thinking about.
I feel like Squidward has big ass lips.
No. The guy in Marvel.
Oh.
Yeah. All right.
So,
it's not worth it.
Yeah, to show the audience.
Just wanted to show you.
So they had no lips. They were just really weird looking. They just looked like a different being trying to be human.
Yeah.
And they would pass off enough to kind of make people uncomfortable and not understand what was going on, but not enough to convince you 100%, I'm not talking anything weird. This is just a person. Right. So it was this weird in between, like, uncanny valley thing where they didn't really know what was going on, but they were too nervous to fight it, you know? Except Mary Hyre. She was a real firecracker, that one. She had an attitude. She would fight with them constantly. She'd fight with the cops constantly. She was like really in John Keel's corner. She was a scrapper. She really wanted to fucking get to the bottom of it. She was like really into it. And still to this day, if you listen to the guy that runs the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, they have a big statue and they have a museum there. It's really cool.
Have you gone?
No.
Can we go?
I would love to. I've been wanting to go for years. I mean, Mothman is my favorite. It's my favorite thing. Yeah, it's my favorite story. I want to go so bad.
It's in West Virginia.
It's in West Virginia. Yeah. It's a far drive. I already looked. It's like 6 hours from here. So, Virginia itself, West Virginia. I mean, what the fuck was I just saying?
Sorry. Museum.
Oh, so the guy that runs the museum is the son of
Mary.
No. He's the son of, I want to say, I could be wrong. So if I am wrong, I'm sorry. But I'm 95% sure that he's the son of, what is his name? Roy Gross. The one that saw where they let the dog out and the dog went missing. I'm pretty sure it's the son of Roy Gross. And if I'm right, it's the kid that saw the UFO in the sky with the Mothman hovering over the car.
Right.
If I'm getting it right. If not, his mother or father was a witness of the Mothman. And it's his whole family was kind of like prompted to start this museum, and he runs it to this day.
Right.
If you talk to him, he says that, the town loved John Keel. They absolutely loved him. They all trusted him, and they thought that he was like a superhero. But the other thing was that anyone that was involved with it was embarrassed and they were ashamed. So they didn't necessarily want to put this information out, but Mary Hyre was trusted by them. So she was super important for getting the inside scoop in town because everybody knew her. It was a small town. It's not this giant city.
Right. But if he writes propaganda, if that's his gig, then sure he could have convinced the whole town that he was the hero.
Exactly. But I'm going to be honest with you. that 100% could be that 100% could be the angle, but I'm going to more vote for John Keel as hero than I am fake hero. I love this man.
I want him to be the
hero.
hero.
I want him to be the hero. He was loved by everyone. He was like a rare figure in the UFO community because people really respected him.
Yeah.
And even like towards the end of his life, in 2002, they put out a Mothman Prophecies movie. And that movie kind of reinstated interest in the Mothman for a while. And John Keel, on his deathbed, more or less wrote like a new updated, what's it called? When you write something in a book, like a preamble or something like that.
Okay.
Prologue. He wrote a new prologue in 2002, where he basically says, like, I still feel all this is true. I don't redact necessarily anything. There could be information that was a little weird because it was written 10 years after the fact, but I still wholeheartedly believe this. And his family is convinced, and anyone that knew him really just, they didn't think he was lying. I don't think John Keel was lying. Let me put it that way. Do I think that he was 100% valid in his points? Probably not. It's probably a little rough to say that he was 100% true.
But we believe.
But I believe that he believed,
100%.
I think that he believed enough to think that what he was doing was the right thing and that he wasn't being misleading to people.
No. He thought he was doing the right thing.
Exactly. He thought he was doing the right thing. And he does name a couple things that happen in the town that he thinks is a little weird. So one of the things that he says alongside with the Men in Black were animal mutilations. As we said earlier, they had seen the dead dog on the way into the power plant. UFO sightings and animal mutilations and even cryptid sightings all go hand in hand. They always have. Anytime there was a weird UFO thing, there's always like a cattle thing. Like cows being abducted by UFOs is a stereotype. The chupacabra goes after sheep.
Goats,
it's the goat sucker. There's like all different, like Bigfoot, they'll find like carcasses of things and they'll say like this has to be a Bigfoot because of A, B, and C. So the idea of animal mutilations in a case like this isn't weird, but John Keel really, really tries to nail it because there are so many instances in this story where people are like, oh yeah, I let my dog out and then I didn't see my dog again and the Mothman was there. So they claim that the Mothman more or less killed their dog. Realistically, I didn't really find too much to have to connect that. I don't really... If none of that was there, it wouldn't matter, in my opinion.
Right.
But I just figured I'd bring it up. And then, this is probably the most fun thing that I found. John Keel claims that he found a pattern, and he calls it the Wednesday phenomenon.
Okay.
Do you know what this means?
I don't.
So apparently, according to John Keel, that UFO activity happens the most on a Wednesday.
Okay. But that's weird.
Yeah, why is that weird, you say? What's the first thing that pops in your head? Calendars are man-made.
I mean, like you can toss a coin 100 times. It could land heads 100 times. It doesn't mean it still doesn't mean it's 100%. It's still 50%. So like the fact that it's on Wednesday, it doesn't matter.
It's still 50%.
It doesn't. It's still 1 in 7.
Well, my idea was that like we made Wednesday.
Right.
We could call it. We could just start calling Wednesday Friday, and now it's Friday.
Right. The gods don't care about
who gives a fuck?
Wednesday.
You think a UFO is like coming down? They're like, oh, we can't land there, Jim. It is a Tuesday.
Right.
So he claims that on Wednesdays there's more UFO activity than anything else, and he claims that about 19% of UFO sightings happen on a Wednesday.
Which isn't even that much.
No.
No.
I mean, if you like divvy that up, it's like a little bit more than the rest. I guess the rest would be like what, like 13 each or something.
Yeah, it's not that much.
It's really not that much.
No.
Yeah, I don't get it. But listen, am I a UFO researcher?
No.
Sometimes I mean, I feel like I am just as much as a UFO researcher as everybody else is, to be fair. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is probably one of the most significant events, if not the most significant event to happen in the story. Because this is the only concrete real thing that we know happened, and it is just an absolute fucking travesty. It's tragedy, not travesty. Tragedy. It's awful.
These are the Carfax.
These are the Carfax, yeah. Well, that's a fun reference to make right before I talk about what I'm going to talk about. We are obviously talking about, if you know anything about the story, we are talking about the collapse of the Silver Bridge, the bridge that I spoke about earlier. It's the bridge that connected to Ohio. And again, it was extremely important to everybody in town. Their family, their friends lived in Ohio. They had jobs there. That bridge collapsing was very hurtful to the town, obviously because they lost a lot of friends and family, but also because they lost their access to potentially their income, their family, or just, just how they lived their life. There were certain things that they had to go to Ohio for, just naturally, just because of how things worked back in the day.
Right. This is 66.
This is 66.
There weren't that many roads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So leading up to the bridge collapse, Miss Heyer claims that she had a dream of people drowning and that there were Christmas presents floating in cold water. Pleasant plains. Keel also claims that at this point, all hell had broken loose in the town. One of his UFO associates had quit, claiming that he didn't explain why. But then, I'm just going to break away from this really quick. John Keel claims that this child, he was like a teenager.
Right.
He claims that he quit and didn't give him a reason why, but then also says that the kid told him he feels like UFO research is a black hole and it's going to ruin his life. So I'm going to say that's the reason why.
That makes more sense.
Because I'm going to say at the time, even now, if I like go to a job fair and they're like, what's your current job? And I'm like, I'm a UFO researcher.
Right,
they're not going to be like, oh, good. Like, how much do you make a year? They're going to be like, no, really, what do you do? And I'm going to say in 1967, it was probably worse.
Probably worse, yeah.
So he quit.
People weren't even like hip to UFOs like they are
now. They weren't open to them being real. They were interested in them as a fantasy thing. So to go back to the Marvel thing, right?
Right.
Imagine if right now we're all interested in Thanos as a character, and then all of a sudden 2 years from now people are seeing a flying Thanos in the air.
Right.
That's more or less
crazy.
what the idea was.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So he claims that the UFO assistant quit. Didn't explain why, but he did. He also claims that entities were starting to spread rumors of him. Like I said, Men in Black were going to people's houses and they were just talking bad about him. And this is where John Keel says, and I quote, "It's time for no more Mr. Nice Guy." That's what he said in the book.
That's what he said?
Yeah, he said it's time for no more Mr. Nice Guy.
What did that mean?
From this point on, he did basically exactly what he was doing before that point, which was researching the Mothman. So
just far away.
From far away in New York City.
Yeah.
This whole thing with his assistant quitting and Mary Heyer having the premonition and all that stuff, I kind of feel like this is part of the entertainment factor. I think this is probably what we could get on John Keel for the most. And it's only because realistically he could easily say that Mary Heyer had a dream about a bridge collapsing because he said it after the bridge collapsed. So it's the same way that I could say, yeah, I had a dream that the ferry was going to crash that time when the ferry crashed.
Right.
And the New York City ferry crashed years ago. So I could just say that I thought it was going to happen. And I was like, oh, yeah, it did. It happened here.
Right.
Right. So I don't necessarily put anything to this. But it does kind of lead into his explanation of why he wasn't there if he thought something was going to happen. Right. So the actual prophecy kind of didn't happen. John Keel claims the entities told him of an event on December 15th, which was the day of the bridge collapse.
Okay.
But they said that the nation was going to experience a huge power loss when President Johnson flipped a switch to light the lawn for Christmas. So every year the White House would have an event where they would flip a switch and everything would go on for Christmas. It was a big event. They were doing that on December 15th. John Keel claims that he had gotten a call giving him that information. And when Mary Heyer told him about the premonition, he didn't see it as a premonition at the time. So he didn't think it was important to go to Point Pleasant. So he stayed home preparing for a national power outage, for the grid to go down and pandemonium to go off across the country.
Right. Because he was with his family.
He wasn't with his family. He was actually alone. He was alone in an apartment in New York.
Jesus.
And he was watching this happen. And soon enough, December 15th, he's sitting down. I want to say it was like 4 p.m. or something like that. And he's watching it on TV, and they flip the switch, and nothing happens.
Right.
Around that time, around 5 p.m., he receives a call from Mary Heyer, distraught, letting him know what had happened. This is still, to this day, the most tragic bridge collapse in American history. It is just awful. I mean, basically, you're in a car, all of a sudden you're dropping, and if you don't get crushed by concrete, you're stuck in your car and you drown. It's just absolutely awful. the premonition of the Christmas presents floating in the water and everything. Obviously, it was 10 days before Christmas. People were going shopping. That's why the bridge was so crowded. There was also an issue with the light right by the bridge, and the light would go a little too long, so it would always back traffic up way too far. So the bridge was basically as packed as it could be, which is what caused the collapse, according to experts.
That's crazy.
Reports range from the Mothman being on the bridge earlier that day to the Men in Black. I'm sorry, not the Mothman. The Men in Black loosening screws on the side of the bridge. But obviously, after the fact, people were called in. This was a real-world event. This is not a paranormal event. So investigators came in, and they claimed that there was a flaw in the bridge during early construction that basically they would have had to take the bridge apart to understand that it was there. So it was just an unfortunate thing. There was just, according to experts, there was no avoiding it. It was just going to happen eventually.
Or they're just hiding.
Or they're just hiding the fact that a giant moth creature came and did this to you.
No, the Men in Black came and threatened them and said, this is what you have to say.
That could also be. And if we believe the conspiracies, it wouldn't even be the Men in Black threatening them. It would be the Men in Black in conjunction with the CIA threatening them.
Right.
So the CIA would be the ones threatening them.
Yeah, I buy that.
Yeah, while they're on their fucking pedophile plane rides. But that's beside the point, right?
Right.
So yeah, the bridge collapse is the cap to this story. I think, in my opinion, this was the moment where the town went, oh shit, this is real. This isn't fake. This isn't fun. We can't just all have this idea of, oh, there's this cool thing going on and everybody's having a fun time with it. And, oh, I saw it too. Now, like, your friends and family are dead. You know, like, this is like such a real thing that it almost snaps the town out. And literally from this point on, Point Pleasant hasn't had a significant Mothman sighting since. So that's kind of where the Mothman also gets its idea of being a harbinger of doom. Yeah. So the Mothman will be seen during times of potential unrest or potential stress. There are modern sightings of the Mothman happening in Chicago recently. Chicago, unfortunately, is like the murder capital of the country, and it's been for a very long time.
Right.
You know, if you listen to rap music at all, you are very aware of what happens in Chicago. It is a very scary place. And the Mothman has been sighted in Chicago for the last 3 years, probably more consistent than it was in Point Pleasant, which is very interesting. But
if Mothman was in Chicago, he'd already have an album about how he killed all those people in 66.
He's like, grah, grah. 63rd, actually. How dare you?
No, in 1966.
Oh, I thought you meant... Oh, it's the street. It's
oh, my bad. Right over. It went right over my head.
So Mothman isn't it didn't go away, it just went away in Point Pleasant. Yeah. And this is the end of the Mothman story in Point Pleasant. And this is the beginning of John Keel's career. So this is kind of the thing that catapulted him into the UFO sphere and what gave him the respect to continue to write books and be taken seriously. And he made a career out of it. You know, he became a somewhat accomplished author. The Mothman Prophecies, I believe, is probably his best-selling book, but it was a very good selling book. It sold, you know, very well. I believe it was a New York Times bestseller. So it's like, you know, he made money off of it. He did well for himself. I'm sure his family got royalties from the movie. I hope they did. And like I said, till the day he died, he believed that Mothman was real, you know?
Yeah.
And I think once the town kind of snapped out of it, interest had moved to a real thing, and there was so many real things that they had to take care of, whether they wanted to or not. It just faded, and that was it, you know? And the Mothman was kind of pushed to the side and faded into folklore history forever.
Yeah, but that's because Mothman died in the bridge collapse. That's why they never saw him. He was there.
He was in one of the cars?
Yeah.
He was driving to Ohio?
No.
He was leaning out of the car like, come on, go! Like, knocking his horn?
Didn't Mary for Hire have...
Wait, hold on. Did you say Mary for Hire?
Sorry, what was her name?
Mary Hire.
Mary Hire, my bad.
Mary for Hire. She's a porn star.
My bad. Mary Hire. You said Mary...
I'll dress up like the Mothman.
You said Mary Hire said
they definitely fucked hard.
They were,
100%. They definitely they were definitely sucking each other.
You said Mary Hire said that there was Men in Black at the bridge.
No. Mary Hire didn't necessarily say that. It was just a reported thing after the fact that people had seen. And again, but
the Men in Black were there.
Again, it's just a report.
Right,
and there's conflicting reports. There's people saying that they were there all day, nothing happened, and then there's people saying it's Men in Black, and then there's people saying that there's Mothman.
Right.
Again, it's one of those things that there was so much happening, and then a bridge collapsed. That after the fact, these are the stories that are coming out after the bridge collapsed. So now, mind you, people are stressed out. They're going through some shit, and the town had been experiencing a monster attack for a year and a month, and now they're dealing with this, so they can't help but connect it. So, in conclusion, the Mothman. UFOs, animal mutilations, Men in Black, vampires, fairies, leprechauns, giant birds, hairy humanoids. Examples are Bigfoot and Skunk Ape, witchcraft, cults, ritualistic sacrifice, psychics, government conspiracies, abductions, and Woody Derenberger going to a planet filled with nude aliens. These are all the things I didn't talk about that were in this book. I just want to be totally clear. Right. So if you're interested in any of those things, pick up the book, please. It's fantastic. It's so good. I've read it probably 6 times in the last 2 years writing the script.
I've been hearing about this for
2 years.
2 years straight.
Yeah. I've been asking you to do this for so long, and we finally have done it.
I'm so glad.
And I'm so glad.
Yeah.
So now, after I give you all that,
and
I'm saying seriously, right?
All right, seriously.
Like, all jokes aside.
No meme.
How do you feel about it? What do you think happened?
I mean, I think it's... At that time, I feel like at that time, it was so easy to just get wrapped up in whatever it was. Because we see like how easy it is now that people get wrapped up in whatever they're tuning into on their phone. Back then, it was just one channel.
Yeah.
So I just feel like if one channel was saying one thing. Yeah. Right. But I'm saying like whatever the paper was, it was the local paper.
Oh, you mean like literally one
channel of information? One stream of information, one stream, right? One source. So I just
and I guess it plays into the whole like what's it called? Mass psychosis, mass hallucination, stuff like that, like the dancing plague and all that type of stuff.
Right.
I kind of feel the same way. This is exactly what I wrote.
It would be dope if he was real.
I would love that.
And he died.
And in like a really like deep, like, ooh, type of way. I do kind of feel like the Mothman is real, but again, in like a Tulpa way. The same way that now Slenderman, we have, unfortunately, crimes being committed in the name of Slenderman, who started as a literal contest on a Photoshop website. Like, we know for a fact that the Slenderman isn't real. But now we have people killing other people or attempting to murder other people for the Mothman, for the Slenderman. I feel like the Mothman is a very similar thing. It's just been willed into existence by the thought of it being in existence.
Yeah.
And it's not even in like a materialistic way. I don't think I could just materialistically make the Mothman in front of me by thinking about it. I just think that it's in our heads. It's in the collective consciousness. So now when something happens and it could fit that's what we're going to see from now on. That's just how I feel for it.
Yeah.
And my thoughts, I have 3 points. I wrote them down.
Yes.
I do not personally agree with John Keel on a lot of points that he makes in the book. But again, I do think he is my hero. I want to lay down in his strong arms and feel the love of his UFO research on my neck. I can't imagine the entire town just went crazy. This is word for what I wrote. I can't imagine the entire town just went crazy. I would say that most of the town really believed it, and I believe that something happened. And one of the big theories that I just want to put out there right now that I do not believe whatsoever is that there's a poison gas theory, that because the TNT area was literally to manufacture TNT for the war, I believe World War II or Korea, one of those two,
people were hallucinating.
People were hallucinating. I don't buy that. I feel like that would be so easily explained and so easily proven by this point in time. It's been 60 years, I'm sorry. And it just doesn't make much sense.
Also, did the poison stop after the bridge collapse? Like the TNT stop after, because that's when those sightings stopped.
No. The TNT they hadn't been manufacturing TNT they hadn't been doing it for like 10 or 15 years before that.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it was an abandoned... It was literally like these big concrete domes that kids would go and drink and party in. And, it was like a party spot, more or less.
Right.
So, I don't necessarily know what happened, but I do believe that something happened. And I don't think everybody was crazy. I just think that, maybe they were a little bored and took it a little too far. I think that the bridge collapse was due to human fuck-up. I think that it's easier to say it was the Mothman. I think that it's harder to say that your fellow men did something that killed 46 people that you know and love. And I think that that's just human nature. And the third point is that I want to point out that John Keel opens chapter 12 by talking about how Woody Derenberger was pregnant for an alien experiment, and he claims the whole town believed it because they believe anything at this point. And I think that's probably the best way to wrap up this episode, because that is probably the best way to describe it. So all that being said, that's the Mothman, my favorite cryptid. Just an absolute incredible story. And good night, everybody. It's been great. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.